Today, we'll be looking over characters who played support roles, what they brought to the table, and how their stories ultimately affected Hyuk's journey to avenge his brother. Some played bigger roles than others. Some played dual roles. Some played barely any role at all. Hyuk may not even known that they were on his side, but they all contributed something. However, there are a few names that get left out, simply because their stories are too big to be considered side characters. We first meet Jongko in Chapter 1. He comes off as respectful and timid, introducing himself to Hyuk in a nervous manner. From his demeanor and introduction, Hyuk marks him as a loser. It's interesting to note that he also thinks of his own brother the same way. The head of the class bullies assigns Jongko to teach Hyuk, or rather Hu in this case, his duties as a shuttle. It's during this time that Hu actually gets to know Jongko. He develops a bit of empathy for Jongko through this situation. He begins to understand just what it was his brother was dealing with. He wasn't just a bookworm. He was bullied, and suffering every day without Hu's knowledge. Hyuk witnesses the relentless bullying that Jongko endures. This gives him a sense of what he's dealing with, or going to deal with, as he moves forward in his mission to topple the organization running this school. Feeling like he's unable to help Jongko, he simply watches the bullying until Jongko can take it no more. Learning that Jongko was bullied trying to help him, Hyuk decides that he has to repay that kindness, and moves forward with even more vigor in his mission to take down the circle. Not only are they responsible for his brother's death, but now Jongko's as well. And he also feels complacent because he did nothing to help, thinking Jongko would be able to handle it. Hyuk dishes out a bit of vengeance, and then attends Jongko's funeral. He describes him in words that truly fit Jongko. He had a good heart, and he was always looking out for people. And that ultimately cost him his life. And sadly, the only one who appreciated it was Hyuk. He relayed the message to his father, who thanked Hu for remembering his son that way. Jongko could be just another faceless teenager, but at least one person remembers him. And he remembers him as a kind person. I guess he can't ask for anything more. Ko Tae-hoon and Jang Il-han. These two are actually some of my favorite support characters. They showed a lot of growth, and I think they redeemed themselves for their earliest actions. When they first show up, they're nothing but a pair of bullies. Ko Tae-hoon in particular is the lowest ranking, so therefore he has to do the most to stand out. But he really doesn't. He's really just another run-of-the-mill bully. But it seems like he was just trying to survive, trying to keep himself from being another victim, because he really doesn't have what it takes to be in an organization like this. Ko Tae-hoon is someone who's neither fighter nor thinker. He sits firmly in the middle. He can throw a punch, but it won't be a very good one. He can pass a test, but no one's going to call him a scholar. Jang Il-han's sliders, however, are a little bit more tweaked. He's stronger than Ko Tae-hoon, but definitely dumber. We see that when they decide they want to try and turn the two against each other just to fuck with Hu, they go to Jang Il-han first because he's the easier to manipulate. Why? Because he's just not that smart. It didn't take much, just a few words from Do Jong-hoon, and he was ready to turn tail. But thanks to Ko Tae-hoon, he didn't. And in the end, they both stick by Kang Hyuk as he's being beaten down by Cho Hyun-sung. The two of them step up, knowing that they could very well be beaten to death by this lunatic, just to protect a guy who beat them up just a couple of weeks earlier. They understand that the reason Hyuk beat them up and the reason that Cho Hyun-sung might beat them up are two very different things. And it seems that Ko Tae-hoon, at least, was ready to take down the circle pretty early on. Whether it's because he was smart enough to know that Hyuk's strength was the real deal, and Ilhan simply wasn't, or because he really wanted to leave the circle and turn over a new leaf. Ilhan was a little more reluctant. He didn't think that Hyuk was good enough to beat the Royals, and he certainly didn't think that Hyuk was good enough to beat him. He found out both were wrong, and thankfully he chose the wrong side. Thankfully for himself, of course. It would have been terrible had he been on the wrong side when Tae-jin and Jong-il got involved as well. But I think the true test of their character came when Lee Tae-hyun gave them one more chance to betray Kang-hyuk, and they said no. They were surrounded by dozens of men, all who had access to weapons, and yet they still put their lives on the line because they couldn't betray him at that moment. I've never overlooked their actions with Jong-hoo, but I do feel that they made a great turnaround, and hope for their success in the future, because they never fucking show up again. Park Han, ranked 20 in the Royal Bodyguards. There isn't a whole lot to Park Han. He's a simple character. He has his own brand of honor, and he operates with a good heart. He's similar to Jong-hoo, I suppose, but with strength. Although he's now a member of the Circle, Park Han intended to get rid of the delinquents in the school, along with Sung Chul, but they quickly discovered that they're nowhere near strong enough. They couldn't even fight Do Jung-hoon by himself, let alone the entire organization. And so with that, he has to reluctantly join the Circle. He takes the money that's given to him and holds on to it, planning to one day give it back to the students it was taken from. Park Han quietly plays his role and knows his place amongst the Circle members. He doesn't stir up trouble, but he doesn't back down when he doesn't have to. He follows the chairman's orders to avoid any trouble. When Kang Hyuk attempts to goad him into a fight, he absolutely refuses because the chairman has not given an order. No matter what Hyuk says, he doesn't fold. He walks away with a calm head and his pride intact. Ultimately, however, he does join Kang Hyuk's quest to take down the Circle. He isn't exactly given a choice once they turn on him, but his trusting and naive nature allows the snake Cho Hyun-sung into the plan. Because of that, Lee Tae-hyun knows his every move, and he ends up being betrayed. Then he misses the entire final fight because he's knocked out on the roof, only showing up once everything is over. It's a shame. I think he could have made, well, not a difference, but certainly the added manpower would have helped. Park Han seems to have a long-standing friendship with Sung Chul. However, it seems like the friendship has taken a bit of a hit ever since Park Han got the spot in the Royal Bodyguards over Sung Chul. However, Park Han never seems to hold it against Sung Chul. He never takes his bad attitude into account when doing anything. He looks at Sung Chul as the same friend as always, and tries to be understanding about his position. Sung Chul seems to be from a poor family. Perhaps he has a single mom. This leads to Park Han paying his hospital bills. She calls up to thank him for being a good friend to Sung Chul. This tells me that they have been friends for a long time, and that Sung Chul's mom knows him well. She sees Park Han as a good boy, someone who probably keeps Sung Chul from getting into worse trouble than he's already in. Although he rests at rank 20 in the Royal Bodyguards, it's because he doesn't aspire to go any higher. Park Han is a good fighter, but he can't hurt people who aren't trying to hurt him, and he isn't good enough to work around that. If Park Han fought with the same bad intentions as most of the Royals, he would easily be above rank 12. Similar to Ko Tae-hoon and Jong Il-han, we don't know what happens to Park Han after high school. But from the looks of it, he will probably go on to become a good man. So Ye-ran. So Ye-ran is the perfect example of a naive high school girl, completely unaware of the danger around her, but also a meddling busybody. These two things don't mix well. While she takes action out of kindness, she forgets her limitation. It was easy for her to run off Hwang Sung-hwan and Jong Il-han, but she can't really hold a conversation with Han Sol without getting scared. That's because she knows that those two will back down easy at the slightest mention of a teacher. But Han Sol will meet her outside. But also, when she comes up against someone like Hyun Sung, then she's at an absolute loss as to what to do. She takes action without thinking, which leaves her with no idea of what to do when things go wrong. She freezes up, and someone has to come save her. I'll never fault a person for having a good heart, but you need to have a brain to go with it. She was also easily swayed by Hu. It didn't take much for Hyuk, posing as his brother, to convince her to do something. She was just eager to be helpful to someone she seemed to like. But she isn't an unlikable person. She's just nosy and has a habit of getting herself into things she shouldn't. But her intentions are always in a good place. It's just that doesn't matter when you're talking to someone who will absolutely do terrible things to you. But she was always this way. We saw Yeron as a child, chastising the guy who was beating up Hu, as if that was her job. And then later, chastising who she thought was Hu for beating up him. But everyone has to start somewhere. And maybe So Ye-ran is how you get Chae So-yeon, someone who's seen things go wrong from the inside, and has the heart and will to change them, as well as the fortitude to do what's right. So Ye-ran was actually the first person to realize that Hyuk was posing as Hu the whole time. She went to school with both of them as a child, but transferred districts around the third year of middle school. She also took the bank book out of Park Han-sol's desk. She shows willpower and resolve. I believe she has what it takes to be a prosecutor in the future. Well, if she has the grades for it. I suppose that's the one thing we don't know. But, as I said, she did figure out that Kang Hyuk was posing as Hu. Park Han-sol is first mentioned in chapter 21, when So Ye-ran shows Hyuk the bank book. But the first time we actually see her, she's putting So Ye-ran on notice, letting her know in no uncertain terms that they are not friends. So Ye-ran is a high-ranking member of the circle, the general affairs manager. Her main job is to take care of the money, but she also controls the literature room for when they need meetings. Although she has to get the key from So Ye-ran, it's not like that's much of a hassle. She reports everything she sees to Tae-hyun, and is a loyal subordinate, because that's what she needs to be for the mission. Park Han-sol infiltrated the circle, and rose up the ranks, taking control of the girls of Taesan High. And while operating as one of Lee Tae-hyun's high-ranking officials, she's been reporting her whereabouts and movements back to Hu, whom she was also dating. As it turns out, she left that bank book for him to find. I guess So Ye-ran got to it first, but it did seem like there was some awareness between the two of them that Hu was operating with both of them. That, however, is also what sparks Han-sol's hostility towards Ye-ran. She's apparently possessive and territorial, like a lioness. She doesn't like this girl getting cozy with her man in any way. And because of that, Ye-ran is an enemy. I do have to wonder about how those two met. Ye-ran is almost the complete opposite of Hu. Fiery, and able to fight. She has no problem using violence to solve her problems, which Hu was adamantly against. She was devastated at his loss, but she didn't develop an attachment to Hyuk because of it. Aside from being different from Hu, she's also different from Ye-ran. She has no problem fighting and is able to talk herself out of a situation. She fools Min-soo into thinking that her father is on the phone. And with him right in front of her face, she lets Tae-jin know exactly where she is, leading him to her rescue. And even after being rescued, she doesn't become docile. She takes charge and drives Tae-jin to the fight, even planning to join in herself. There aren't many women in this particular series, but Han-sol is definitely one of the fiercest. Park Kwang-min, a dedicated inspector who specializes in school violence. He seems especially taken by the Jong-hoo case. He seems to be the only one willing to get to the bottom of what happened. At times, it seems like he might be taking things a bit personally. Perhaps, like Hyuk, he also has personal experience with school violence and the loss of someone close to him. But we aren't given any backstory on Park Kwang-min. From his work with his partner, Park Jong-ho, he figures out that Hu's death was never reported, and that Hyuk has been moving suspiciously. Despite that, he was still unable to figure out that Hyuk was moving as Hu throughout Taesan High School. Nevertheless, he provided some support in Hyuk's quest to take down the Taesan High School delinquent circle, even going so far as to recruit his friends as backup. He has a habit of breaking or completely ignoring the rule, following his hunches like a detective would. Inspector. Park Kwang-min doesn't see the delinquent circle as just boys being boys, but rather boys becoming scumbags. He doesn't give any thought to the fact that they're just teenagers, because their actions are those of men. And that's why we see that he isn't willing to cut Huan Sung Huang any slack, because Jongku wasn't cut any slack either. And God knows, neither were any of the other students. Park Kwang Min is a classic hard-boiled detective, even though he's an inspector. The kind of guy you might want in your corner if you're going out for vigilante justice. I remember in my initial impression of Chae So Yun, I felt like she was a bit dismissive of the school violence. But reading back, I think that may be just because I already knew the facts. Looking back at it now, I suppose she's just laying down the facts for Inspector Park. You know, she doesn't really know what's going on. We do. So now, I just see her as someone who wants to know what's really going on. She wants to get to the bottom of things, and then she wants to execute. She didn't slack with Huan Sung Huan or Lee Tae-hyun. And so, funny enough, she's now become one of my favorite characters, just because of her resolve and dedication. Frankly, I believe that the law should be uncorruptible, and that it should also be scrutinized so that it remains as such. People like Tae-hyun's father, who corrupted for their own means, are exactly why this system, well, we say it doesn't work, but really, people like that are exactly who designed it, so it does work, doesn't it? But that's the problem. It doesn't work for us. But people like Chae So-yeon try to ensure that it does, that there's some fairness in the system, even if it isn't in her favor. She understood that the school violence case itself could be dismissed by the authorities. She didn't lie to herself about that, but she pursued it anyway. She looked for the truth, she got to the bottom of it, and she made sure that the people who needed to pay, paid. Chae So-yeon is exactly who you want in the prosecutor's chair, because she'll make sure she has the facts before she tries to put someone away. But when she does try to put someone away, she'll try to make sure they get exactly what they deserve. These characters are getting a special mention, but they're not being broken down here. Because the thing you have to understand is, while they may play minor roles in this story, these are by no means minor characters. They have their own stories, and they're big ones. They tie into the entire world that this is set in. So it wouldn't be enough to just sum them up here as side characters. But I also didn't feel right just leaving them out because they were here. We don't know anything about their relationship with Hyuk before this, but we do know that it's an important one if they showed up to a fight like this. Each man showed up without hesitation to fight for Hyuk, and when they got there, they were all the backup he needed. In one way or another, each one of these men is capable of dropping someone in one hit. That makes them a force of nature. Jong-gil strikes suddenly and without warning like lightning. Tae-jin crashes and rumbles like thunder. To put it simply, without them, Hyuk wouldn't have been able to come out of that situation a winner. These two are main character level. As for the other three, to be honest, I'm not quite sure who the guy in the hat is. I have an idea, but I'll have to reread everything to be sure. But as soon as I find out, you'll know as well. The other two, you meet in Dokgo Rewind. From the beginning, they've been with Hyuk, and we don't quite know how they met, but they all hang out in that alleyway. I suppose you can think of them as a much higher level Taehoon and Ilhan. A bit of a comedic duo, but let's not give away too much too soon. Although they showed up late to the fight, it wasn't exactly their fault. After all, Hyuk didn't exactly keep anyone in the loop, so by the time everyone found out what was going on, it was a little bit too late. It was already happening. And so each of these characters played a role in Hyuk's mission. Taehoon and Ilhan, Park Han, they all gave him information on the organization and tried to back him up as much as they could in any fight. So Ye-ran played what support she could, bringing Hyuk the bank book. She also gave Hyuk a lot of information on what Hu was doing before he passed. Han Sol was the same. She knew everything Hu was doing because she was part of it, and with that, she was able to give that information to Hyuk. He was able to move that over to the detectives. Because of Park Kwang Min, pressure was put on Lee Tae-hyun and his organization. They weren't able to move freely for 3 weeks. That gave Hyuk all the time he needed to break down the royal bodyguards. effectively taking away a bulk of their fighting force before the final conflict came up. And Chae So-yeon follows everything up by prosecuting Lee Tae-hyun to the full extent of the law. In this chain, she's the only one who has any power to go against his father. And so, even though they've never met, she's the one who has the final word and Hyuk's family finally getting justice for what happened to his brother. Things don't end with a happily ever after, but at the very least, the issue itself is settled, thanks to all of these people and their efforts towards Hyuk's mission. Mission.